because I did have one student say that he was ill and couldn't be here today. So keep writing though, I don't mean to interrupt you. You about 1 more minute to finish up if you're still working. I see some of you are probably done. See if you can try to complete your poem as best you're able. can stop where you are. How many of you were able to write an entire poem? Or at least get like a healthy poem started? Okay, was it challenging? Yes. Somewhat challenging. How many of you write poetry or have written poetry? Only a few people. Okay. So this might be a scary genre to, try to test out, but that's okay. Don't be afraid to experiment. Just try to be authentic. Don't be afraid to just kind of write what comes. I know, we'll talk more about this in a second, but for myself personally, if I have a poem I want to write, I usually start with an idea and I kind of just like sketch it out very bare bones skeleton-like, and then I go back in and I start layering in details, layering in metaphors, playing with sound, playing with images. That doesn't always just kind of happen for me in one fell swoop. Sometimes it does, but a lot of times it's me making multiple passes at and revising my idea until I get it exactly how I want it to be. So don't be afraid to try. So, let me ask you this. How many of you read poetry just for enjoyment? Anybody? AJ? For those of you that do you have any favorite poems or poets that come to mind? People that you're reading now? It's okay. I'm not going to put you on the spot. Just like to see what people are into. Well, we're definitely going to introduce you, or the book is going to introduce you to a bunch of poets. I just made myself a note. I have tons and tons and tons of chapbooks and poetry books. I'd like to bring those with me to next class. If you want to look at other collections, you can leaf through those while you're in here. I can leave those here for a little while so you can come back and check them out. But let's just start by defining what is poetry. How would you define what makes a poem, personally? Go ahead.
Probably the pacing of it. You have to do it a certain way.
Pacing. And I think kind of what you're pointing at is it's unique in form, right? It's different than, say, writing an essay or writing a short story because it doesn't have that text wrapping feature that we normally see in prose. It has line breaks. That's the biggest thing that makes it unique. Although there are prose poems and they kind of cross genres and that gets a little hairy. We're not going to specifically talk about those, but for the most part, what makes a poem unique is that it has those line breaks. It does rely on pacing. It relies a lot on that oral quality, the way that it sounds, the way that it's performed, the images that it conjures, and it's very, very concise and condensed. In our textbook, if you had a chance to read chapter 10 yet, I don't know, you just came off of vacation, you may not have felt like doing that, that's okay. Make sure you read it though for next time. Some of the definitions that our author included are the natural language of all worship. I love that one. Devil's line. An imitation of an imitation, which is so true because when you're writing a poem, you're trying to capture some facet of life, whether it's something you've experienced, something you're trying to filter through from someone else's perspective. It's a slice of life, and you're trying to create, it's almost like a painting with words. A pause before breath and memorable speech. And as I said a moment ago, it is great to read poems silently to yourself, but they are meant to be performed. They are meant to be heard. They are meant to be paced and presented in a certain way so that all of those sounds really carry through. Performances is important. And also part of that is that they're meant to be remembered. How many of you have taken speech class? And all of you have to take speech class, right? So you'll take it at some point. One of the things that you might learn when you take your speech class is that in order to be an effective speaker, sometimes speakers will use things like repetition, wordplay, things that really resonate in a person's mind so they're able to remember what that speaker is saying. Poetry is similar in that regard. It's really relying on, using sound in a unique way so that it sits with the person who's listening. So, how many of you have studied poetry at some point in a literature class, so you have some familiarity with this stuff? Has everybody had that? I feel like that's probably a staple somewhere. So you know the difference between formal and free verse? If you had to, does anyone know what the difference is? Have you heard those terms, formal and free verse? Anybody think they could take a stab at what the differentiation between those two things is?
Isn't like formal follows the structure of poem, has stanzas,
Rhyme schemes and a meter.
And free verse is kind of just whatever. Write it down and keep going.
That is literally the only difference. In formal poetry, and there are all different kinds of classic formal poems. I believe our textbook has an example called a villanelle. I don't know if it lists it as that, but I'm pretty sure. I can't remember which poem. I don't have my book with me. But one of them is a classic formal villanelle. Probably never even heard of that form, which is cool. That's okay. How many of you have heard of a sonnet? Probably everyone. We had to study Shakespeare at some point. That's an example of a formal verse. It follows a very specific set of rules. It has to be a certain number of syllables. The syllables have to be accented, iambic pentameter, in a certain order. There has to follow a specific rhyme scheme. Everything has to fit tidy. Whereas in free verse, you get to do what you want to do. More recently, I don't know, I want to say in the last 50 years, free verse has become a lot more popular. So having poems that don't follow a set rhyme scheme, don't kind of fit into that tidy box, they don't have that certain necessarily rhythmic flow, that's become popular. But then if you're familiar at all with slam poetry, how many of you, we've talked about slam poetry, are you all familiar with that? That, I definitely wouldn't call it formal, but it's kind of, it's giving a nod to some of those elements, because there is definitely more rhyme scheme present in a lot of those pieces because they are so performance driven. So you kind of have an anything goes movement happening at the moment. So we've already talked about difference between formal and free verse. Formal verse hails from, because we think about these as being poems that we don't typically read, they're not as contemporary. It hails from our oral history. Of course, if something rhymes, if it fits a very rhythmical format, it's easier to remember. And so if you're traveling from place to place and you're telling the story of a great person you knew or somebody that was in your family, it's going to be easy for you just to keep recalling that, because the rhyme and that predictability of everything is going to help you to retain that in your memory. Now, I call here to your attention this Appendix A. I don't teach this, but you certainly can look through here. It's a section called prosody. And basically, that entire section gives you different elements that would lend themselves to free verse. So different kinds of things you would want to consider as you're writing your poem. Because it could be daunting, too, if you're like, well, I've never written a poem, and I would rather have, a set of rules to follow rather than make this up as I go. In my opinion, if you like poetry once we start writing it, if it's something you're interested in, the best thing you can do for yourself as you hone this skill is just to read more poetry of other people. Read a nice variety, look at different time periods, also look at what contemporary poets are doing. So you have a sense of what modern audiences are looking for, and you have a sense of different things you can try on your own. And as I said a minute ago, free verse gained its popularity in the 20th century. So they mimic, when we're using free verse, we tend to mimic more conversational or casual speech patterns, and we play off of those. So if you could turn to Try This 10.2. I don't remember what that is. Who wants to tell me what that is? I don't know if you have to say what that is. We'll find out.
No, that's probably not it.
What's it say? Well, you don't want 10. You go to your chapter 9.
Yeah.
Try 9 too.
This will be it. It says, eat a meal blindfolded, write a poem in which you describe it only in terms of taste and smell. So I'm pretty sure.
Oh my gosh, you should totally do that.
We should do that.
We should all go to the bistro in order, because we don't have to mask over there, is what I've heard. Well, I mean, you didn't have to mask anyways if you were eating, but apparently now we don't have to mask when we're in the hallway. I don't understand.
I don't feel as if that's.
I guess
We
all
should
you have to wear a mask is for classes.
Which is funny, because I brought this up in my morning class, and I had this one guy, he was sitting there, and he's like, I don't have a mask, or I just thought he took it off because he was trying to breathe, and he's like, I didn't even bring one. I'm like, I don't have an extra one.
Our first COVID week, so we were allowed to wear it in buildings and not in classrooms. It was different.
Yeah, and then somebody's like, well, what if you're meeting in a classroom for a club or something else? I'm like, well, that's not a class, so I don't see why you would have.
Or I asked in the library, we have to wear it in the library.
I want to know. So yeah, what's the rule?
I don't know. She didn't answer, and I was like, it's weird because is the library technically considered?
So that's what
I
my last
asked
class said.
about the library, and I asked about clubs. And clubs, if you're meeting in a classroom, but it's not a class, like a lecture or anything,
You don't have to.
then you don't have to.
This should just kept it. They should just
And
kept it
then
under
in the
because this is
library,
so.
you
Oh, 'cause this is like a
This is so
file.
stupid. I'm sorry.
It doesn't
I'm not
know,
supposed to share my opinion.
the thing is, like, I get it, 'cause, like, okay, like, like, if you're gonna do it, do it for everything. Because, like, there's a mask, what's the difference between you're in a classroom with, like, your mask on, and then you're in the building with your mask off?
Like technically, as soon as our class is over, if we choose just to sit in here for another hour,
We can
can
take it
take
off.
our masks off
Yeah.
and infect each other with COVID that way.
Like,
It's COVID is pretty. We've all been infected with it. Like, I got sick right before the semester started with COVID,
I think it was
and
like
like a lot of us, I don't remember who specifically who, but across my three classes, it was like COVID, COVID, COVID. Everybody was getting sick.
I think this was an attempt at like a political move to sort of like mollify people who don't.
We talked about like I think there are a lot of instructors who were very unhappy with Penn State's response and that they didn't make vaccines mandatory for everyone.
Yeah, I think this is
And then-
probably the worst outcome for them doing this like run around.
Like, cause I know, like, for line ambassadors, like, when we, like, walk around campus, like, to give tours to new students, we don't have to wear them anymore. We used to have to wear them, but now we don't. So, and I know that, like, I went for my tour sign-in this morning, like, you don't have to wear them, and, like, the admissions officer using
So somebody this morning said that certain offices, it's like a preference, so it might say,
Yeah,
please
so,
put
like,
your mask
whoever's
on
office
if you
it
come
is,
in.
if they want you to wear a mask, you kind of have to have one, but.
I don't know.
Because, like, sometimes, like, there's lectures in the auditorium, which technically isn't a classroom. So,
Is that
some,
mask?
so some professors.
Oh, it depends on the person.
Yeah, so some professors, I have two classes in there. One professor, like, doesn't have a mask on because it's technically not a classroom. And then my other professor has a, like, mask mandate because it's class. So.
If it were up to me, I would just let everyone decide.
I just have one in my
I feel like
backpack.
this is. Anyways, let's sign two.
Anyways, 9210, what does it say?
At this point, type into your browser Allen Ginsberg's American
Oh.
Sentences. You will see more examples as well as being directed to farther websites. Devoted to the American sentence. Try a few more. How much meaning can you pack into one 17-syllable American sentence?
Okay, so how many of you have heard of Allen Ginsberg? I'm gonna say probably none of you. No? He's great. You should look him up. So he lived in San Francisco like during the 60s. He was part of the whole like beatnik movement, which kind of made a resurgence recently with the way that slam poetry works. But anywho, he was very, very progressive, postmodernist, and he came up with this format called the American sentence. So we're all familiar with haikus, right? It's basically his take on a haiku. So what I'm going to do, you can do this, like you can type in American sentence into your browser and you'll see examples, but I'll do it too. Ginsberg, American. I can't type anymore. I don't know what happened. Like, I am the worst. Ginsberg's variation on haiku. You can pick any of these. They explain it. There's a picture of him. See, and he was friends with like Kerouac and Cassidy and Burroughs and all these awesome people. So let me see where it talks about. Okay, so basically he was kind of pushing back against this idea of trying to use haikus because it didn't really suit the English language. They weren't really meant for the English language anyways. So he wanted to come up with his own format. So basically you write one sentence. The sentence has to be 17 syllables. That's the rule. So it's kind of fun because it's not so strict that you're really going to be fighting to try to cram everything in. You'll be able to write one or two of these right now. Going to show you some examples, and you can find other ones if you keep searching, just if you want to get inspired. Let me blow this up. Taxi ghost at dusk past Montmartre in Paris 20 years ago. Put on my tie in a taxi, short of breath, rushing to meditate. Tompkins Square, Lower East Side, New York. Four skinheads stand in the streetlight rain, chatting under an umbrella. Rainy night on Union Square, full moon. Want more poems? Wait till I'm dead. That gray-haired man in business suit and black turtleneck thinks he's still young. Bearded robots drink from uranium coffee cups on Saturn's ring. Crescent moon, girls chatter at twilight on the bus ride to Ankara. Subject-wise, all over the place. Like, you can literally just kind of let your brain go, be inspired with whatever you're thinking in that moment, and then try to make that idea or that concept fit into your 17-syllable pattern. You might generate one of these and be like, meh, not my favorite. Or you might generate one and be like, wow, that's a really startling image. A lot of these are very image-driven, obviously. You can see some of them have, like, a sense of irony built into them. That's certainly good. You can see they can tend to wax political at times. That's okay, too. Be inspired by anything you want. So go ahead and try to write at least one of these, but if you have time in the time that I'm giving you to do more than one, go for as many as you can do. This is basically our American haiku. Let me set a timer. Where's the timer? Just sort of finish whatever one you're working on. Go ahead and put your pen and pencil down when you're not signing with them. While we're waiting for a few people to finish, if you want to just, you can glance at what you wrote and just kind of see how you feel about it. It's still working. How many people were able to write one American sentence? Raise your hand if you got at least one. How many get two? Three. You're working on a third. Anybody get more than three? You did? I got to 4. Did you? 3? That's good. Okay. If you're like, listen, I know you're finishers because I want you to get it done. If you keep working, you can ignore me for a second. How hard was this?
It was a little like challenging, but like you have to like not worry about it. But I use like code words to get more out.
How did you figure out like what you were going to write about? What was that process like, just to get the sentence to be born?
Just grabbing random things that I thought about.
Is that what everybody else did? That's what I did. Literally, like whatever popped into my mind.
Yeah, just like pick the topic and like shape the poem around it.
Yeah, this is pretty easy. Maybe easy is not the right word, but you can see like, I'm sure I said this at one point in time. When I was younger, I mean, I've always loved writing, and I used to come along my naturally, and I felt like there was this muse that was guiding me. If I didn't have that muse, I couldn't write. And the truth is, you can always write even when you don't feel like you can. Sometimes you just have to turn off all that overthinking and just let your brain do whatever your brain's going to do, and you'd be really amazed with what falls out. Does anybody want to share any of their American sentences? Like anything you thought turned out pretty cool? Go for it, girl.
Love, very simple kind of feeling, not always good.
Okay. Inside the little rhyme in there. How's it? Anybody else want to share? Did you like any of what you wrote, or do you not feel like it was the greatest?
I don't know like the things that I wrote. Yeah.
There's less pressure on this genre because since it's so short, it really is just dictated by the number of syllables. Like, you don't necessarily have to get all of the oral elements and the images. Like, you might have some of that shining through, but it's such a short poem. Anybody want to share anything? You're going to have to read at some point, so this might be like a nice first step just to practice throwing some stuff out there. Go ahead.
But who are we to decide what the moral of our story is really?
I like that. I like that. Anybody else do a question? That's a good idea. Let's stop the movement. Anyone else? Alright, go for it.
Speak now because my entire voice is moving like sleep.
Yes. That is a good one. Alright, come on, these are all awesome. Share more. I love them. I don't think you can really do this assignment incorrectly. Go ahead.
Babies cry out on a Monday night when mothers practice their.
Yes. Okay. Oh my gosh, we're all poets. It just took this one exercise to see it. We all can do this. Go ahead.
I think I put too many syllables in it.
That's okay. You can always go back and cut them.
The lesson is subway surfers, trains, metal sails, and really unbelievable street.
Oh, fuck yes. Okay. You guys are amazing. You're making me so happy right now. All right, what else?
Searching for you when building and other things to reflect.
You guys, I cannot wait for you to write poetry. I cannot wait. I'm so excited. This is the energy you got to channel because it's in here. Oh, I'm so excited. This is my favorite genre. I can't stress that enough. Anybody else want to share before I go on? Oh, you guys nailed this. All right, so I would tell you when you get into writing poetry, if you get stuck, come back to this exercise. Maybe like try a couple lines, try to confine yourself to a set number of syllables, see what shakes out of that, and then you could always build off of that initial scaffolding. So if you're stuck for ideas, I think just kind of like telling your mind, shut off, I'm only worried about filling this space of syllables. That's what I want. All right, we're going to keep going. Made me so proud. Okay, so we did that. Now, as I've said, and I can't say enough, this is all about the sounds that you create. So we're going to look at arrow. Different ways that you can play with sound, experiment with sound, but that's going to be your best friend when you're writing poems. It's a different experience, of course, when you're writing fiction and nonfiction. Yes, you can still play with sound, but you've got a lot more words to play with in your fiction and nonfiction because your pieces are going to tend to be a lot longer than your poems, which are so short, so condensed. So you have to make every word count. Now, I said this earlier, and that's why I'm going to bring some poetry books to class with me next time. Imitation is your best friend. Now, I don't suggest copying people, but looking at maybe poets whose styles you really like, poets who resonate with you, look at what they're doing, take note of how they use sound, and then try to do something similar in your own writing. I mean, even skilled painters do the same thing. They'll look at, a master painting and they'll try to replicate it. Not because they're trying to copy it and say it's theirs. They're trying to understand, well, how did that person achieve that? Once you understand those building blocks, then you can start to intuit that into your own writing and make it your own. So definitely start reading more poetry. Does everybody know where to go to find poetry if they just get bored one evening and they're like, you know what, I want to read some poems? Where would you turn to find those things? Anybody have any ideas? Social media, but let me do a little search. Google's always a good friend, for this kind of thing. Poetry.com, if this is the publication. I hope I don't have this address incorrect. No, that is not. No, this isn't what I want. I want the poetry magazine. So you could go to poetry.com, but I can't really personally vet this. Look, here's John Donne. I don't know if any of you studied John Donne, but you can see he was alive from 1572 to 1631. So that's all well and good. May not be, though, the best example if you're trying to write something that's more contemporary sounding. I don't know what else this has, if this is people just upload poetry or if this is actual published poetry. I want to type properly. Magazine. I can't remember. I think it's in my syllabus. Poetryfoundation.org. My point is, if you're going to do a search, you can do a search, but you kind of want to make sure that it is a reputable thing. You can find lots and lots of individually curated collections of poetry, and that usually it's anyone can submit, and that's fine. You can kind of see what just, other people who maybe aren't considered necessarily professionals in that field are doing, but if you want, better examples of what is being published, what are people reading. Poetry Foundation, this is going to be a great place to go, and you can look for poems and poets. Check that out. The New Yorker, which we read from last class, is another great publication that puts everything for free online. A lot of things have paywalls these days, so look, poem of the day. Let's just say you want to continue to get a taste of something, and come here. You can even, and I was doing this, but it was killing my inbox. You can sign up to receive a poem of the day. So every day in your email, you'll get whatever the poem of the day is. And if you want to keep refreshing yourself or, introducing yourself to new poetry, this would be a great way to do that. All right, I'm going to keep going. Just, if you have questions about resources where you can go just on your own using the web, so you don't have to buy books and you don't have to, spend money. I don't want you to spend money really if you don't have to. You can borrow stuff that I have, or you can go to a resource like this. All right. Now we're going to look at some different kinds of sounds and things. Some of this is probably familiar to you. So alliteration, raise your hand if you've heard that term before. I imagine everybody has heard that. So that's just repetition of your initial consonant. I've got a stubborn goose whose guts honeycombed with golden eggs. So that harsh G sound that's being repeated. Assonance, same idea, except instead of your initial consonant sound, you are listening to your vowel sounds between consonants. At the retreat, Lee wasn't allowed to speak or read for 10 days. So you have that E, long E sound being repeated throughout. And, you know, when you hear either of those, it's memorable because you hear the stresses on those repeated sounds, whether they be vowels, whether they be consonants. And then consonants, has anyone heard of consonants? Same idea, it's just the end consonant sound. So we have beginning sound, middle sound, or end sound. We say a heart breaks like a stick, maybe. I want to stop here and look at this for a second. Read it to yourself, really listen to the sound that it's making, and you tell me, in your opinion, why would a person choose to use that repetition of sound there? We say a heart breaks like a stick, maybe. What's that doing for those couple of lines? Yeah.
To me, it sort of reads more like conversational.
Conversational?
Like repeated sounds.
That one in
Especially-
particular?
Yeah, especially with like the break in between breaks and like, so like. followed
Creates a
by-
pause. Is that
Yeah.
what you're saying? Like
Yeah.
you would have in a normal speech pattern. Okay. And I want to take that a step further. I totally agree with you, and that's kind of where I'm aiming, but I want to go one step further and look at it maybe more from like a metaphorical level, what it's doing. We say a heart breaks like a stick, maybe. What is the end consonant sound that you're hearing? It's being repeated.
Would it be like the A sort of, and like maybe, and then.
Well, think about this. So this is repetition of a consonant as opposed to a vowel sound. This is a consonant sound.
The K sound.
The K.
Breaks
This is-
like stick.
When you hit that break, you say a heart breaks. It forces you to stop because to say it, it's a very, I wish I had studied linguistics. The way that your mouth has to spit that out, it's creating like full stop. It almost feels like a break, doesn't it, when you say it breaks? You can like feel that sensation of breaking, like a stick. Stick also has that. It almost feels like I'm snapping a stick in half when I say it. You get the same as it's just my crazy poet mind. Do you have that same feeling when you read it? That's what it's trying to do. It's trying to, using the sound, evoke the image that it's painting. Now see how brilliant that is. If you can do that, if you can find a way to make the sound further emphasize what it is you're trying to say, or further connote like a feeling or a mood that you're trying to convey, that's hugely important. That's exactly what you want to do. Other things, true rhyme. So that's when you have vowel and end consonant sounds matching. Dr. Seuss action. 1 fish, 2 fish, red fish, blue fish. I kind of cheated because, like, fish all rhymes and then we have 2 in blue. Anywho, you guys understand what true rhyme is. It's something you learned probably in, like, kindergarten. And we're all familiar and comfortable with it. Now, we're also going to look at internal rhyme and slant rhyme. So these are variations on that true exact rhyme. So it could be true rhyme, it could be exact rhyme. Internal rhyme is when you have one word at the end of the line rhyming with a subsequent word in the midst of a line. So, typically, especially if you're working with some kind of form, there's emphasis placed on the end of every word at the end of a line. In your free verse, that doesn't always happen. Sometimes you have enjambment, sometimes you have these like really abrupt line breaks that occur, and they don't split like where you would think they would logically split, or they don't split like where that pacing feels like they should. So this is kind of an example of that. My grandfather died one morning in the dampness, tamping, watering the roses for the coming season. Now, where do you feel in that rhyme happening? That internal rhyme? Remember, it doesn't have to be 100% exact or true. In fact, oftentimes, unless you're working with a specific form of poetry, like if you have a model that you're trying to adhere to, you do run the risk, if you're using a lot of true rhyme or exact rhyme, of sounding somewhat like, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of like a kid's sing-songy type thing, or like, and you don't want to sound juvenile, I guess, for lack of a better word. You want to avoid kind of lessening the meaning of what you're saying by having that rhyme overshadow it. So that's why a lot of times you'll see free verse is the preferred method, because you can play with those stops, you can play with the rhyme. But anyways, I didn't get to let you answer this. Where do you see the rhyme happening here? Go ahead.
Damp and tamp.
Yeah, so dampness, tamping. Do they rhyme exactly? Yeah, that's okay. You hear, however subtly, that there is that overlap, and it kind of, this is about the death of a loved one, a grandfather, tamping, watering the roses for the coming season. The iteration of that amp sound, I think, just kind of helps to amplify that sense or that tone of sadness that's evoked just in this couple of lines here. So slant rhyme. We could argue too that is an example of slant rhyme, but the only difference here is that because you have rhyme at the end of a line and then at the kind of midline. So slant rhyme is when you have approximate, not exact rhyming, so not true rhyme. And this is an example from Emily Dickinson. How many of you have studied Emily Dickinson, been forced to at some point in school? Probably all of us, and I'm sure you've heard this term slant rhyme before because she made it very popular. Why should I let the toad work, squat on my life? Can I use my wit as a pitchfork and drive the brute off? So here, the rhyme that you should be hearing, and again, it's approximate, not exact. Work, pitchfork, not exact. Life, and off. Similar, not the same. And again, because it's similar but not the same, it's not super oppressive, it doesn't make it feel like a child's nursery rhyme or something like that. It keeps the focus, I think, more on what is being said and the sound of it than overshadowing with the rhyme. You can successfully write rhyming poems, but you do have to kind of toe that line and make sure that it's not overshadowing what your message is. We're going to try complete this 10.4. What's that one? I don't remember. Yours was you can blindfold something.
Yeah.
I do love that. We should do that one day.
Make a quick list of terms that relate to any subject you know well. You can go back and add to it any time. Kinds of fish or shoes, baseball terms, car parts, fabrics, tools, instruments, whatever falls in your area of expertise.
Okay. And there's an example right on the next page.
Oh, yeah.
What they did was that she used spices, I think.
Yeah.
So you guys, how many of you have your book? If you don't have your book, I want to make sure that you have access to that. If you don't have your book. Oh, it's on there. Okay. Anyone not have their book? It's just me. I was the bad example. This is becoming a turn. Dante's have a photo of that from you so he can see it. Or whatever you want to share. I don't care how you do this. Anyone else who needs to share? We're all friends in this class and things so confident we can share. So this is a fun one. You have to think about something that you know pretty well. You're going to generate these words. You're going to write a poem. I've done this in the past with flowers because I got into gardening in my older life, and I know a lot of varieties of flowers. And I found this. I wish I had it. I've done a couple of these over the years. And I would read it to you really good for any day, but this is really fun. It's going to take you a little longer to get this poem going. But again, when we started this class today, everybody was a little bit like, I felt anyways, like everyone was a little bit leery and afraid of poetry, but these exercises built into the book, these give you a means to generate poetry. To try this, I'm probably going to give you 10 minutes to do this because you're going to need time to talk through this and then put it together into a poem. Let's see what you can shake out. Just think of something you know really well that has a lot of terms you can jot down. tell everybody that we weren't doing Zoom anymore, right? You remember
Yeah.
me saying that? Okay, because I had a couple people message me like they didn't realize that. I just want to make sure I wasn't forgetting to told you. Thank you. I'm gonna pause my recording so that if anybody has to watch this at home, they're not staring at nothing. Keep writing. I'm gonna see how many slides I have left. A lot. Couple hundred. That's fine. We'll finish this next class and then we'll get into the poetry after that. You can keep writing, and when you're done, you can pack up and leave. If you have any questions, stick around. Otherwise, enjoy your day. You'll have to remind me where we left off, though, when we come back. Disconnect. Where's my recording? Here.